Shalom, this is Rabbi Dov Linzer of YCT, and welcome to Parsha Wisdom. I'd like to share with you a thought specifically around the phrase, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. For the rabbis, that phrase came before the giving of the Torah, at the middle of Parshat Yitro. But in fact, that phrase actually occurs at the end of this week's Parsha, at the end of Mishpatim. Now, what is the meaning of that phrase, Na'aseh v'nishma? The normal explanation given is, we commit to doing before we have even heard the mitzvot. Signing a blank check, whatever those mitzvot are, we are going to do them. The problem is that in the Pshat, when it occurs as it does appear in the Torah, after the giving of the Torah, and after the giving of all of the laws of Mishpatim, we already have heard everything. So what then is the significance of saying Nishma after Na'aseh? And the Sefat Emet says that the word nishma here does not mean we will know the mitzvot, we will hear the specifics of the mitzvot. Nishma means that we will understand the deeper meaning of the mitzvot. We will understand the values that are embedded in the mitzvot, the ethics of the Torah, for which the mitzvot at a certain level are just physical manifestations. The language of the Sefat Emet is that they are clothing to those deeper values. And that idea that we will try to understand those deeper values has to come after a na'aseh, has to come after an a priori commitment to the fact that we will do it. We understand that God commanded it, and however we do or don't understand what the values are, we are committed regardless to doing it. Once we start that way, there's not a concern that then we're going to engage ourselves in the values. Because if we started with more of an explanation, more of an ishma, we could say, look, the na'aseh isn't so important. What's really important is achieving the values of the mitzvot. But if you start with a na'aseh, then you will not abandon that even as you come to focus on what ultimately is the religious message behind them. So that's one way of understanding it, that Parshat Yitro, the Aseret Dibros comes before, God's powerful commanding voice, we're going to do it regardless, and then comes the Nishma, after we have that commitment, there's no fear that we will engage in those deeper explanations. Now, there's another way to understand this, and that is along the lines of the famous phrase by Marshall McLuhan, which is that the message is the meaning. That what ultimately the meaning of Shabbat is to connect to God, to remember God created the world. You can't say that in the abstract. It only gets meaning through an observance of the 39 melachot, of Kiddush, of Hamotzi, of Havdalah. It is the entire way that is embodied through the mitzvot that actually shape its meaning. And therefore, the na'aseh has to come before the nishma. That deep embeddedness in what a life lived around Torah and mitzvot and halacha is key to the message that is embedded in it and is key to understanding what that lived experience of that nishma is. So that's the na'aseh v'nishma. Commandedness precedes that exploration of the meaning. But that exploration of the meaning, again, according to the Sefat Emet, is so central to how we're supposed to live our lives. It's so central to the message of the Torah. And that's the focus in this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha opens with Eila HaMishpatim Asher Tasim Lifnehem. Present it to them. Don't just deal with commandedness. Have them actually acquiesce to it. Have them be partners in it. And then at the end comes that Moshe brings them into a covenant with the book, and he says, you are partnering with God. And that's where they say Na'aseh v'nishma. Now that we have that committedness, now that we understand being commanded, now that it's embodied in our day-to-day lives, we need to partner with God, not just passively observe. We need to actively use our human intellect to try to understand the meaning, to try to apply that meaning to our lives, apply that meaning to the way we live our lives, and apply that meaning in our understanding and interpretation of Torah. It is ultimately what Torah Shabbat is about. So let us in our lives be committed to the Na'aseh and the Nishma, to a life of Torah and mitzvot that we do because God has commanded it to us, and that is a priori, and that is regardless of whether we understand or don't understand whatever meaning, and it shapes our understanding of the meaning. And then let us not forget to live a life of nishma, to live a life that's not just about rote observance, a life that's not just about passive participation in mitzvot, but a life that our mitzvot are imbued with a sense and a reflection on what their meaning is and what meaning that brings to their lives, and that we are partners with God in taking those values that we understand and in understanding and applying that to halacha and to the way we should be living our lives in that partnership between God and humanity. Thank you and Shabbat Shalom.